Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Dr. Alexander Vindman with us today. We'll chat with him in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening. And we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media. And we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Alexander Vindman is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and was the Director for European Affairs on the National Security Council. Before that, he served as the Political Military Affairs Officer for Russia for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as an attaché at the US Embassies in Moscow and Kyiv. While on the Joint Staff, he authored the National Military Strategy for Russia. He's earned an MA from Harvard University, where he served as a Hauser Leader, and an MA and PhD from Johns Hopkins, where he is a senior fellow. He also leads the national security think tank Institute for Informed American Leadership, is the president of the nonprofit It Matters Foundation. He's an executive board member for the Renew Democracy Initiative, a senior fellow at the Kettering Foundation, and a senior advisor to VoteVets. And he's the author of the It Matters Substack and the New York Times bestselling books It Matters and his latest, The Folly of Realism. Alex, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me back, Andy. I guess I didn't screw up last time too badly.
No, you're one of the faves. You and Rachel, always one of the faves. So I want to get into the book. I also want to talk with you relatedly about Ukraine, Russia. But I want to start off with, there's just a barrage of things going on in this country right now. So I want to go through a few of these briefly and just get your thoughts on them. The first of which is your family and you guys emigrated to this country when you were a toddler. You have gone on to have a stellar military career in the government. Your brother Eugene is now a congressman. In a sense, you're living the American dream, which is really what immigrants aspire to when they come here. Yet the Trump administration is in the Supreme Court today, arguing for its ban on birthright citizenship, also arguing on a judicial level that lower and district level courts should not have the right to make decisions nationally. Your thoughts on this stuff?
Yeah, so I think let's just start with the courts one about what they're looking to do. They're looking to arrest one of the biggest breaks on their attacks on the public sector. What's successfully happened over the course of, scores of cases were Trump executive orders that were overreach and in violation of the law, and that courts have decided to were able to arrest the implementation of these orders. So they're looking to release or kind of gain unfettered access to do whatever they want regardless of legality. It's hard to believe that the court is going to decide anything in their favor in that regard, because the premise is that the courts are adjudicating executive orders and Trump overreach and finding that they're acting illegally. But I think there's something to be said about maybe a bigger or maybe less relevant but still important facet here, is that there's also a consistent pattern of court venue shopping, that Musk could basically have all his cases heard in this district that he has extreme sway in. And this idea of venue shopping so you could get the decision you want by picking the right court is problematic. So I wonder if it's going to be a decision that addresses both those features. Mm-hmm. It gives some guidance on how courts can decide, federal courts could decide decisions at the national level, but also addresses this venue shopping idea that it's a loophole that needs to be closed. So I'd be curious to see what happens with this one. I think it's not going to be a favorable outcome, but it'll probably be something that counts for both of us. With regards to the attack on the constitutional amendment granting birthright citizenship, I think it's a non-starter. I mean, the language is pretty plain. and there's really, I can't, on the face of it, I don't see how you could interpret, even if people come to the United States and do what's called an anchor baby or something of that nature, how that how the plain language in the Constitution finds that anybody that's born in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, that's it's pretty straightforward. But there are some concerns, of course, that this court that has a conservative streak will have potentially a split decision. This is my layman's interpretation of like a esoteric legal matters, but this is you get Alex Vindman's view on these two things, and I think we'll probably end up in a good spot on birthright citizenship, and then we'll probably get a mixed decision. And I think when I say in a good place, I think it still could be kind of a split decision within the court, and I think we'll end up in a reasonable space where the courts are not going to want to curtail their own power, right? People like to accrue power; they don't like to give it away.
Right.
So I think we'll see what ends up happening there, but I'm not entirely pessimistic.
And what is Alex Vindman's thoughts on Hamas Force One?
That's an interesting way to put it. I haven't heard it called Hamas Force One, but obviously this is the Boeing 747 being gifted by the Qataris, who are, obviously have a close relationship with Iran, have been serving as a kind of negotiating channel for Hamas and a safe haven for Hamas leadership. So I take that point. I think, on the face of it, what's disturbing is that the Qataris learned the lesson that last time around, they didn't really play ball and they didn't kind of easily bend to extortion from the Trump administration. This time, they took the easy way, the path of least resistance, gifting this jet so that they stay in good standing with the Trump administration, warranted or not. And that's the rules of the game, that graft kind of could serve your interests, that you could buy the president of the United States off. So that's a big picture, really kind of deeply concerning development. The plane itself is in a lot of ways a non-starter from a security perspective. It's a plane that's going to have to be completely overhauled and retrofit and upgraded for the comm suites that are required to operate as Air Force Ones, as Air Force One, with the suite of defensive countermeasures against air defenses and things of that nature. It needs to be swept and probably broken down to make sure that it doesn't have any listening devices. This is a multi-year effort. It's going to cost tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve that level of security. It is not a plane that could be used by Trump as the president of the United States. So really, it does amount to a violation of the emoluments clause as a gift to the president. It's kind of a buying the president off, because this would be pretty much something that comes to the United States, is parked, and then is transferred to Trump's presidential library for his personal use, because that's what he probably thought he could get away with it now. I think there's been an uproar that's probably going to kill that idea. He's still hanging on to it. But it's from a security standpoint, it's kind of a non-starter. With a lot of folks in various corners, strangely enough, the MAGA landscape coming out and rejecting this idea because they don't like Hamas Force One and the Qataris, or they don't. Some people take this flagrant grift is too flagrant. I don't know. I think that he might get rolled on this one. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I always try to find the comedy in everything, and the notion of the Trump presidential library is very comical. Like, it is. Like after Mein Kampf, what is in that library?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually more like of graphic novels, right? It's filled with graphic novels and lots of pictures. Because the guy notoriously, I'll attest to this. The guy notoriously doesn't read anything. I mean, like the prep documents that I'd provide reams of background documents to make sure he didn't say something stupid in his phone calls with, like, his counterparts, whether it's the Russians and Ukrainians, and he couldn't even read like the one sentences that say, "This is a congratulatory call. You're calling to congratulate Zelensky on his victory, and say that the U.S. Looks forward to being a strong partner." And he instead goes on a corruption kick, which is, I guess, standard fare.
The interesting thing is, you mentioned the emoluments clause. The Constitution is very clear. The language is super clear. It actually even says you cannot accept gifts from foreign kings. Kings. It uses the word kings. Yeah. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. The other thing that happened this week that was disturbing is the firing by Tulsi Gabbard, DNI, of 2 career officials that led the National Intelligence Council. And apparently they were just fired because they told the truth. And the truth was that what they found didn't support invoking the Alien Enemies Act to justify deportations. That is truly disturbing.
It is disturbing, but it's unfortunately expected with Tulsi. I recognize one of those names. I think I sat in briefing rooms with at least one of those folks. Career professionals, there for multiple administrations, and the truth embarrassed Tulsi that she was supposed to fabricate some sort of analysis that suggested that the folks that were wrongfully deported were part of Venezuelan, gangs or whatever the case might be, and turned out that was not the case. And what this does, though, fundamentally, is it's going to be a chilling effect on being able to provide good counsel. So it's not anything that's written going forward. People are going to be like, okay, how is this what the administration wants to hear? Mm-hmm. And if you follow that kind of logic, you end up in terrible places, like weapons of mass destruction, justifying our war of choice in Iraq. You end up with terrible decisions like Putin thinking that this would be a cakewalk, this war against Ukraine, that it would be, done in 3 days, because people are telling the authoritarian leader what they want to hear. So those are the kinds of consequences. It is a room for lots of mistakes to be made.
And doesn't this create a problem with foreign governments, partners of ours, friends of ours, allies of ours, with regard to intelligence sharing? Like, how damaging is it when you think about these other countries and how they perceive the reliability or lack thereof and the trust factor with American intelligence?
Well, so that's happened a long time ago at this point with this administration. A long time ago, meaning like, we're 20 days in, but less than that. But it happened as a result of Signalgate, or I prefer the term whiskey leaks.
It's a good one.
Yeah, that's the one up your Hamas Force One. So
touché.
Yeah. So I think to me, the damage was done by selecting Tulsi Gabbard into her position when she's compromised, by politicizing intelligence, by putting in Kash Patel into the FBI because it's got an important intelligence sharing relationship for criminal activities and stuff like that, transnational crime. We were were looked at skeptically, and I would imagine that if I were in the shoes of a foreign power, friendly ally, that I would be much more careful and circumscribed about what I provide. This is just another data point. This is just another data point that cooperation with ODNI is perilous, and that this is going to further kind of reduce the information exchange, maybe kind of dry up channels. Although those countries are going to want to preserve their relationship, so they might color information differently. Provide vanilla reports. Who knows? In order to not kind of burn bridges.
And also attached to this Alien Enemies Act situation and the claims of invasion, Stephen Miller said that the president might try to suspend habeas corpus because, the situation is so bad and we can't rely on the courts. Yep. That's also pretty terrifying. But is that just noise, or do you think
It is.
To me, that's the noise to distract from the other much more serious transgressions that are taking place.
I think it's serious, but it does amount to noise. There are a lot of other kind of practical things being done. What I would equate Stephen Miller to is an idiot masquerading as an intellect. He wraps his narratives. He wraps his commentary in the guise of some tether to invoking the Alien Enemies Act, or he uses kind of elevated language or something like that to make himself sound like he's smart, or he's making a point. There's like some justification for it. But if you think about what he's saying, he's just kind of mumbling a bunch of nonsense that doesn't really make sense. So I'm not particularly worried about that one. That would be one of those things like almost immediately struck down as soon as they try to do it, and resulting in a huge backlash. Right, left, center, even the folks that want their kind of enemies dealt with. It wouldn't take a lot of thinking for those folks that want to punish Dems or whatever to recognize that you suspend habeas corpus, you allow kind of unrestricted detentions. That is something that could easily be turned against you. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about subjective actions, somebody some right-wing guy crossed some other right-wing guy at some point, and a right-winger gets detained because of something like this. It's the dangers are pretty apparent. It's clearly government overreach, and it's intended to be used in a way in the most perilous circumstances. The country is under civil war. The country was at war with itself. If I recall correctly, I think that was the last time it was suspended in an existential threat scenario, mm-hmm. Not because of exaggerated claims of folks crossing our southern border or something of that nature. So far, it doesn't approach the test of invoking something of that nature.
Here's the thing I don't understand, and I really don't see the mainstream media talking about this. I just wrote a piece that's up on my Substack today. He has been repeatedly out there bragging that illegal border crossings are now down 99.9999%. Those are his words. And he also says, I think it was 3 people got across in the last 2 months. So which is it? Is it an invasion or is the border closed? Because it can't be both.
Yeah, but he's in a lot of, for the courts at least, he's his own worst enemy. I mean, it's his own kind of allocutions that kind of undo what he's trying to achieve and result in decisions contrary to his interests. But he doesn't really think about that way. He talks out of both sides of his mouth. He talks about the fact that we have an invasion that needs to be stamped out, and that he's effective and successful at ending the invasion. So you hit the nail on the head. I think to one audience, he wants to continue to drive the fear, and to another audience, he wants to claim that he's successful. I mean, it's the same way he's talking about the fact that he's tanking the stock market with his tariffs and saying that it was Biden, that it was Biden's economy. I mean, this stuff doesn't really make sense unless you're really highly partisan and it's not logic that's driving you. It's this kind of deep emotional tie that is driving you to kind of embrace whatever Trump is saying.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we've been talking about, his executive orders on birthright citizenship and invoking the alien enemy, it's all tied to this imaginary invasion, which he himself, on many occasions, clearly says does not exist, because he's proud of what he's done to shut the border, to stop illegal border crossings. So let's talk about the book. It's called The Folly of Realism: How the West Divided Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Tell us about the central premise of the book.
Yeah. Well, I think the subtitle or the title I did a relatively good job with. So, The Folly of Realism is like a little bit more of an esoteric kind of wonky international relations theory that says realism believes that countries pursue national security interests, pursue them maximally, and what that really kind of results in is a very transactional approach to the world. So you get Trump, you get the most transactional, you get the most, somebody that completely discards the historical relationships with our allies or with our adversaries and sees, only what's put immediately in front of him, like a free plane, the promise of the Russians delivering on peace, damning the Europeans, our most important trading partners, as abusing the relationship and kind of needing to be punished with regards to tariffs and things of that nature. They don't make sense on their face, because if you're looking at what's immediately in front of you, you're not pricing in 35 years of mistakes with regards to the way we conducted ourselves with regards to Russia. So we get Trump. That's the Folly, is somebody that just is completely chaotic, jumping from one thing to the other. The subtitle, How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine, is really quite self-explanatory. I just wish I would have put it in present tense instead of past tense.
Right.
Deceives itself about Russia, betrays Ukraine. It is the thrust of the book is we buy into what Russia says about itself, that it's a great country, it's singular, it's unique, it's the largest country by land mass, it's got a massive nuclear arsenal, it's entitled to be able to do whatever it wants, a privileged sphere of influence in its own backyard. Because of how special it is, we should treat Russia with kid gloves. We should look for whatever we can do to, whatever small deals, bright, shiny objects, grasp at them. So like this, we could get some wins on the scoreboard. And we should be very, very careful about how we, even if it's to protect ourselves, how we condemn Russia or how we are conditional with our engagement because we know they won't deliver. So it's about hopes and fears. It's about the fact that we've succumbed to hopes and fears along 6 different administrations, from George H.W. Bush, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama, Biden, or Trump, Biden, Trump. Same mistakes being repeated with regards to hopes and fears in granting Russia's exceptionalism. And it is also a story about how, if we've tried this pattern and it's played out regardless of administration, Republican or Democrat, where we haven't been able to focus in on things that really matter, that provide us security, that provide us prosperity, and improve our trade relationships, maybe we should try something else. So I propose a different idea, one governed by the fact that if we think about what matters to America, that it's fellow democracies, it's the strong relationships with our fellow democracies, because they advance our security interests. It's collective defense. It's the economic trade relationships. It's the predictability and stability that we get with those relationships. Maybe we should try this approach, a values-driven approach. I call it neo-idealism. Well, it's a term that's out there. I don't have a better one, so I've kind of adopted it. But it's the idea that values should govern the way we operate. It gives us a long view, a compass heading, a true north that we could follow to focus in on what matters. So we don't end up in a situation where we constantly send the signals to Russia that it could get away with it, whatever it wants. It could just keep putting these dangles in front of us that could keep us engaged or threaten us with nuclear weapons. That if we hold to the things that matter, that's a better way to secure ourselves.
And can neo-idealism and the idea of America first coexist?
It's an interesting idea. I think, I think so. I think from my standpoint, the policy that we've had thus far has been values driven, but it's also been one that serves America first. Why? Because emerging out of World War II, we were a regional hegemon representing kind of half the globe. The communists were on the other side. And in that system, we organized the trade relationships. The dollar was the reserve currency. We were the security backbone for the democratic world. So whether it happened immediately in front, like we got paid up front, or we were the house in a casino, thinking about it in that metaphor, that house always wins. We got on the back end. You can have a values-driven policy that delivers for America. What you can't necessarily have is Trump's, most extreme version of America First, where America has to get paid up front. America needs to be can use the tools in its arsenal, economic power, to squeeze our partners for every last bit of gain. It is it's a longer view of America First rather than the transactional version that Trump is practicing. So I think what we've had an America First policy, first amongst equals though, not first at the cost of stability and encouraging our adversaries, which is what Trump is doing. So he's not practicing America First.
Yeah, I was going to say, in theory, America First, who would argue with that? And I think traditionally that's always been put front and center by any presidential administration. How can we most serve this country, but also have a system of values and be a good partner to our allies? For Trump, it's just a great brand. It makes for a great bumper sticker, rallies, America First. But it just seems like everything he does is not in America's best interest. It's in his best interest. So his America First policy is really a Trump First policy, is it not?
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely right. And, I can't think of a better way to say it right now, but if it's America First, it should be America Always, which is not just in every case, but across time horizons, right? So if it's America First, America Always on that time horizon plane, we're talking about the fact that what's in the long-term interest of the United States, and it's not breaking our relationships with our traditional allies. It's not, inviting the wolves, authoritarian regimes around the world to attack their neighbors. That creates massive instability and shocks, and will drive inflation. If we think about it in that regard, I think that's what's been practiced. It's America First, America Always on that temporal plane. And what Trump is doing is instead, it's America First, America, Trump First, but in each and every type of situation and maximally. And that undermines our long-term good. That makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. In making sense, it makes no sense because nothing Trump does or says makes sense. So it's an interesting proposition to try to make sense of anything he does or says.
Yeah.
How would you characterize the current relationship between the U.S. and Russia?
It's one in which Putin, as a very, very trained and practiced KGB officer, operating both as a KGB case officer in his past and driven by what he learned as a president against multiple Western leaders for the past 25 years, is very, very effective at manipulating the United States. And if before former presidents would advance U.S. national security interests, all Putin has to do here is actually advance Trump's own personal interests, pander to Trump, flatter Trump, cater to Trump's desires for quick, easy wins, the sugar highs of immediate peace or something like that, which is a pipe dream. It is one in which Russia is getting a lot, the U.S. is getting nothing, and potentially it's one in which Putin believes he is comfortable and understands how to manipulate Trump as a useful idiot, and potentially overreaches, because Trump doesn't want to look like the weakling, a loser. He wants to be the winner, and I think there's a scenario in which Putin overplays his hand. He's done that on a number of occasions. Trump looks to be embarrassed. I think this play with regards to the negotiations that were occurring today in Istanbul may be an example of that. Trump was offered to be in the room and mediate conversations between Zelensky and Putin, kind of to score that easy PR win. Putin didn't accept a ceasefire. He said he'd be prepared to do immediate talks. Zelensky calls his bluff, shows up, and then Putin backs out. So it's hard to paint Ukraine as as the bad actor and Putin as a good actor, and that looks like it could be. It's what seems to be driving. I wrote a piece in my Substack that went out this morning and kind of analyzed this. I could see some indications, and I kind of did it satirically. I was like, this is the way the conversation's occurring between these yes men and sycophants in the administration. Mr. Trump, you're a beautiful, brilliant man. You're the man for peace in our time. And you are absolutely right to embrace Putin. Your loser predecessor, Biden, wouldn't do it, wouldn't talk to him. And you're the guy that could, bring people together. But remember, Mr. Trump, President Trump, that he's a KGB case officer. You want to be the winner. And that he might be, playing with you. And that if your first idea doesn't work, it's your even more brilliant second idea of ratcheting up sanctions on Putin and supporting Ukraine. That could be the ultimate means to bring peace. And that's the way, and I think that's the way some of the national security actors might be approaching him. Let's try it this way, but be prepared to pivot to the other way. And I could see some of the kind of some early indications that he might be open to moving in that direction. But he has to learn things the extremely hard way, and that might play out over the course of an additional few months.
Yeah, we know he has no real core philosophies or beliefs, so that leads to no real core strategies. So what does he actually want to achieve in that part of the world? I don't think he has a clue. First he attacks Zelensky, then he's kind of making nice with him at the Pope's funeral, and then he's yelling at Putin on Twitter or whatever. And maybe now, as you indicated, he might be realizing that maybe Putin is not the friend he thinks he is, maybe. And so it's hard to understand any of this in terms of what we would normally consider logical, rational foreign policy making. But regarding the meeting in Turkey, I think Trump tweeted, quote, "President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath," all caps. "Ukraine should agree to this immediately," all caps. When I saw that, I was like, it's astounding to see a U.S. president act like a spokesman for an enemy like Putin. But more importantly, is this a realistic framework? And will Putin ever show up to any meeting when we all know exactly what he wants, which is ultimately to take over and control Ukraine?
So I think the answer is he'll eventually have to. But why would he do that when he does have the U.S. president in his corner and very accommodating, delivering both the messages about normalizing relationships, delivering blows to a Euro-Atlantic alliance that makes us weaker, damning Ukraine? You'd want to milk that for as long as possible. And if you could do that by just dangling, yes, I want peace, but it needs to be under these conditions, he could get away with that for some time, because Trump needs to learn the lessons the hard way. He's pretty thick. So we might, this was a moment where it might be like, this guy's embarrassing me. The Ukrainians showed up. Putin said he wanted to have these direct talks, and then the Ukrainians showed up and he didn't. That kind of puts him in a slightly more difficult situation. But he'll argue out of both sides of his mouth. So I think it's going to be maybe a little bit longer before he comes back around to something resembling. And it's the thesis in my book. We keep repeating the same mistakes over and over. This one is going to be embarrassing to Trump, but ultimately it's the only way to maybe advance the cause of peace is by supporting Ukraine, by pressuring Russia. That's the only way to do it. So we might come back around to that idea. That could have potentially been the case this year if Trump ratcheted up pressure on Russia and support to Ukraine. Instead, it's probably going to be something that occurs next year. because again, the Russians have every incentive to fight on, even if there's no real, prospects of success, but to see what kind of other gifts Trump delivers. So I think that's the biggest consequence of Trump's approach, to cast away any lessons of the past and to embrace Putin.
Are you shocked that he didn't end the war on day one?
I'm shocked by the fact that he didn't completely suspend all support to Ukraine on day one or day two or week one. I thought that was a very significant risk of that happening. And instead, what you had is a hard press from our European allies cycling through the Oval Office. Zelensky pretty successfully negotiating this very perilous environment, including that Oval Office meeting. I think if it would be probably easier for Trump to abuse Ukraine, drop support for Ukraine if Zelensky had foundered, then shown resolve like he did. It resulted in like an 11-day suspension, but the deal is signed on the minerals, on those rare earths, and I think Zelensky's done a pretty reasonably good job of navigating this nearly impossible environment and keeping the U.S. engaged, and the Europeans too, for that matter.
Well, I think we know that congressional Republicans are guilty of vomitous, sycophantic fealty to Trump. But interestingly, on the Ukraine issue, that was the one area where they really started to push back, because some of these guys were around from the Cold War era. So they can't fathom where Trump has taken our foreign policy with regard to Russia and our attacks on an ally like Ukraine.
But that's one frontier. I think the other one is, frankly, this budget, this budget bill, and the fact that there seem to be some fissures developing on the cuts to Social Security and Medicaid, and how that's going to blow up in their face. I think unfortunately, they might pass, and that's going to hurt a lot of people, but it's going to create a huge backlash. And again, serve the cause of getting people to wake up and shake off apathy, because things can get worse, and complacency, because things will get worse. These are the folks that think that Trump was going to deliver some benefits, and that kind of energy is what allows us to score some wins in this year's elections and next year's midterm elections, and start to check some of the excesses of the Trump administration beyond just what's happening in the courts.
My last question is kind of like a two-parter. The first part is to get your thoughts on the negotiation process with Iran, and then also the marginalization of Israel in that process, as well as Trump's negotiating with Hamas. Trump is taking this plane from Qatar, all these other things. If you think the relationship, not just with Israel, but in particular with Bibi Netanyahu, seems to be souring, perhaps.
Yeah, well, so I think it's part of the general philosophy of Trump, where you could coerce small and medium states. It doesn't make a difference if they're friends or adversaries, and you flatter and kind of, compromise with larger states, like he's doing with Russia and with China. I think that Bibi overreached, pushing for a war on Iran. I think that in his view, it's the kind of the last remaining major adversary that Israel needs to contend with. Hezbollah is severely degraded. Hamas is severely degraded. Syria is gone as a conduit for arms and things of that nature. So Iran, this is the moment to strike out at Iran. But I think Netanyahu missed the fact that Trump doesn't have the stomach for hard, and that Trump has been convinced that a war with Iran would in fact be hard, and that he's looking at ways to avoid that, including through negotiations. I don't think that he's got the team to do that, because he doesn't have particularly competent negotiators involved. And Netanyahu trying to push the Trump administration into this confrontation is burning some bridges. I haven't met Netanyahu, but I've talked to a lot of folks that have, and he's not the most likable guy. And I'm sure he's probably rubbing Trump the wrong way, for that matter, mismanaging kind of just the personal interpersonal relationship.
They're so similar.
Yeah, they are pretty similar. I'm frankly a little bit more. I was concerned that the threshold for war against Iran was really, really low, and there would be some, there's a big risk of a larger confrontation. But the way that we resolved the situation with the Houthis, for instance, we could stomach kind of an air campaign and some cruise missile attacks from the Navy for a relatively short period of time, and then kind of throw our hands up in the air, said we figured out kind of a half-assed solution where they will promise not to attack our ships and stuff like that. But if that's about most we could muster there on the mistake of conducting that kind of campaign in the first place, I think that we may not be as close to a war with Iran as I was initially concerned about.
Alex, our conversations are always fascinating. Thanks for coming on, and do come back again soon.
Definitely looking forward to it. Thanks, Andy.
All righty. Take care.
Thanks.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.